Can the latest developments be described as anything other than victory for the Taliban?
I think it's quite clear that the Taliban have won this war. They took 20 years to do it, and they have proven that their strategy of patience will outlast the United States. When we look at their rhetoric, they're talking about it the same way that they defeated the Soviets and even the English back in the early 1900s.
What does this mean for Afghanistan next in terms of its own democracy and what it means for also the rest of the region?
I think that when we're looking at Afghanistan, we're going to see the Taliban come in and try to masquerade as a legitimate actor to establish a government that others will recognize. That would, of course, be a mistake. This is the Taliban government. It's no different than it was in the 1990s. It has not changed its objectives. We're going to watch the Taliban try to reinstitute Islamic law and probably move slower than they did before. But when we're talking about what the Taliban wants, that vision has not changed. And that means that we have the potential for an al-Qaeda safe haven now in Afghanistan.
Katherine, what are the regional implications, particularly when it comes to Chinese-focused interests?
The regional implications are going to continue to rebound. The United States no longer has a presence really in the region, and we're looking at Chinese, but also Iran, Pakistan, even Russia, trying to rebalance in the region as the U.S. and, frankly, NATO draw down and cede their influence.
President Biden has long said that the objective when it comes to Afghanistan was never nation building, right? 20 years, this campaign. What could have been the outcome, and is that sort of a reasonable statement to make to make this exit?
It is a reasonable statement to make. The United States did not go into Afghanistan to build a nation. It went into Afghanistan to hold those behind 9/11 responsible. That included al-Qaeda, and it includes the Taliban. The real issue is that the United States never actually defeated the Taliban and never set the conditions to prevent its return. So when we are talking about having achieved our objectives, I don't think that we ever did. I think that we got close to defeating the Taliban and never put in sufficient resources to do it. We let the civil war get out of hand, and we did not, frankly, have a strategy. There are many different ones over the past 20 years to win the war that we were trying to fight.
Because I think you speak to people that have been following this campaign, and many of them will point to not just failures along the way, but also the miscommunication of these failures, right? Does it come as a surprise to anyone who's been monitoring the situation that we've gotten to this point? Because I think it feels like certainly the American public were told at a lot of points along the way that things were going very well.
I think for the public, it is surprising to see how quickly Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, and it's surprising to analysts who have watched the country as well. But in terms of how well the war was going, there is certainly a reckoning in terms of how it was presented in the media and by our own policy officials in achieving our objectives. I think for those who were staring at the country and understood what was going on, they could read beyond the lines that were presented and see that the Taliban still had strength, that it was ready and positioned to return. So in all of the warnings that were coming out over the years, there's always been a sense that the Taliban could come back if the U.S. were to leave. And frankly, the president decided that we needed to get out of Afghanistan regardless of the cost.
Yeah, there's been a lot of finger pointing going on right now. Katie, take a listen to what former Secretary Mike Pompeo had to say.
It looks like the Biden administration has just failed in its execution of its own plan. It looks like they're now trying to get folks out. This reminds me of when we've seen previous administrations allow embassies to be overrun. It's starting to feel that way. It also looks like there's a bit of panic having to reinsert soldiers to get them out. The plan should have been, much like we had, was that we would have an orderly, conditions-based way to think about how to draw down our forces there. We actually delivered on that promise.
And yet, of course, we have seen that deal that was struck between President Trump and the Taliban as well that sort of ignored the Afghan government. How did we get here?
There is a lot of finger pointing to be done. I think that regardless of whether you agree with the decision to withdraw, it's very clear that the plan to withdraw was not done well, that it did not account for the risks. When we look at how we got here, President Trump started negotiating with the Taliban to pull the United States out. The deal was upheld by the United States. The Taliban never upheld its part of the bargain. The key part of that was actually breaking ties with al-Qaeda. The Biden administration came in and blew past the deadline for withdrawal, but decided to stay with the deal, citing the risk to American lives if we did not. I think that the mistake was not looking at conditions and also not understanding that adding a bit of a delay to get past the summer fighting season could have actually allowed our partners in Afghanistan to maybe contest the Taliban's offensive.